action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try.
Hello and welcome to Call to Action, the go-to podcast for anyone trying to make sense of the world of marketing, advertising and beyond. In an industry that is a minefield of utter bollocks, we aim to capture our heroes and allies from the front line to have a chinwag with. It's like Pokemon Go, with the single but vital exception that it's not a short-term bandwagon of shite. It's brought to you by Gasp, and I'm Giles Edwards. Today I've caught Dr. Grace Kite. A high-flying economist and seriously smart cookie, Grace has over 20 years of number-crunching experience across all the main advertising buying categories. Dead set on helping marketers make the most of their data, she's the founder of Magic Numbers, a team of jargon-free data people with people skills. Despite being magic by name, she believes that when analysis is carried out to the highest possible standards, there's no need for smoke and mirrors. Grace says analytics doesn't lead to change if people don't make it palatable for marketing directors and CMOs to use. In our experience, analytics only leads to genuine change when it has a human face. Welcome to the show, Grace.
Thank you, Giles. That was a lovely introduction. I'm really pleased to be here.
Right, 7 quickfire questions, Grace. Mac or PC?
PC.
Logic or magic?
Logic and... no. Okay, logic. You make me pick.
This one's ridiculous. Mental or physical availability?
Physical.
Nice. ROI or CPA?
ROI.
Numbers or words?
Numbers.
These are too easy. Right. Famous Graces. Grace Kelly or Grace Jones?
Grace Jones.
Last one then. Your marketing room 101 pairing. Double jeopardy or bidding on someone else's trademark?
Bidding on someone else's trademark.
Is that worse or better?
That's worse. That's the one to put in room 101. I listened to some of your previous episodes, and that you ask these things and they're really hard and people want to say both, and I resolved I would definitely just be decisive and say one.
Oh, well played.
Even though it's hard.
Oh, good. Well, I'm pleased it's hard. You didn't make it sound that way. So listen, Grace, I'm so pleased to have you with us. We always like to celebrate weird and wonderful routes that people take in their career to get to where they are now. I want to know how an economist ended up in marketing, because you have a PhD in economics. You founded Magic Numbers was that 12 years ago, I think now? Mm-hmm. But what was your first ever job? And then what was your first marketing job?
My first ever job was working in a bingo hall.
Nice.
Yeah, I actually loved it. My job was I'd have this little radio mic, and whenever somebody thought they'd got a winning, like a row or a full house, I'd have to go over to them and take their book and read out the serial number on it so the computer could check whether they actually did have a win or not.
Amazing. And did people try and cheat the system then?
No, but it was just sort of part of the routine of it, I guess. And the nice thing was you were going over to somebody who just had a jolly win in their life, and it's a real kind of real people job. Yeah, the sort of people that you wouldn't have in an ad, or you wouldn't really necessarily take photos of, but real people, and they were always lovely. The people that went to that bingo hall. I was only about 16.
Oh, okay. I when I was at university in west of England, I did a final year project. It was bingo related, and I spent a lot of time in bingo halls, and certainly in the centre of Bristol, I think the bingo hall was one of the friendliest places for a student.
Yeah, there you go.
So how old did you say you were? About 15 or 16?
Yeah, maybe 16. Yeah.
And was it just by chance that bingo was numbers related?
I'd never thought of that, actually. But yeah, no, just completely by chance. My sister had a job there, and she got me my first job.
Oh, nice. So it wasn't any conscious seeking out numbers and their use in society and culture and community. When you were around that age, you would have been, I'm assuming, I don't know, studying for GCSEs or looking into further education?
Yes, I would have been doing my GCSEs at that time. So it was only like a Saturday job or something like that.
Okay. And how did that lead to your first kind of proper job?
I think it was completely unrelated to my first proper job, but I worked after my A levels as an insurance underwriter, very junior, before I went to university. And actually, I really liked insurance. Which is a bit sad actually, but I quite liked insurance. I like the thought of risk and how do you quantify it, and how do you make sure that you've got enough money in the premiums to cover the risks and what's going to happen in the future, because there's a bit of fortune telling in it. And that was using data. And then obviously I went off to university, and when I came out, I went back into insurance for a while, and I started using data in a more bigger picture way, which was kind of marketing related there. But then my first real job in marketing was I worked at Mindshare as a junior econometrician, and that's where I got my foot in the door.
And did you enjoy that as much or more so than you did your insurance job previously?
Do you know, the funny thing is that for me, there's, and you might think this is really weird actually, but for me, there's actually quite a lot in common between the two jobs.
Yeah.
And the reason why is probably, and it goes back maybe a little bit to that interest in real people, maybe in a bingo hall, or I'm one of those people that if I walk down the street and people have their curtains open, I have to have a nose in, because I'm just interested in real people, and what do they do and what makes them tick and why do they do the things they do and how can you change it. And in insurance and in underwriting, it's using data, and there the data is about what risks are people taking, and how and why and how's that changing. And in marketing, it's what things are people buying and how and why and how's that changing. And for me, the data is always real people, and it's getting when you're analyzing it, you're understanding how real people tick.
There's a post from Bob Hoffman probably a couple of years ago now where he talks about risk, and that what we do as marketers is all about making informed decisions, and he makes an association with placing bets, and effectively says exactly what you've just said about the parallels between the insurance world and marketing world. It is all about making decisions based on the data that you have and then trying to plan from there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, no, that's really interesting. So your early work at Mindshare, did that develop? Did your role change over time?
Yeah, so I loved it. I was so happy, and I just always thought it was so powerful, this idea of being able to kind of get data together and analyze it to see how the world works. And I just always thought it was really interesting, really powerful. And in all my years, I've never got bored of it. Because along with econometrics and market mix modeling, along with finding out how marketing's working, you have to find out what else is driving your clients' sales or their outcomes they care about. And that really is a window into the world and how it works. And I've always found it fascinating and never got bored of it. But I did at one point go off and do my PhD. And it was at that point that I got into freelancing, because I just didn't want to work full time in an office in central London at that point. And then after my PhD, I had kids, so I still didn't want to work in an office in central London. And that's when magic numbers began, because it's been a very organic process. I started off doing freelancing and then got asked to do so much of it that I took on a colleague, and that pattern has carried on, and now there's 10 of us.
That's incredible. And in a nutshell, if you can say it so succinctly, what is it that you typically find yourself doing for people?
We create bespoke analysis to answer clients' questions, and often it is, did our advertising work? Which bits work best? What should we do next? But also it's about how is the outside world affecting us? What's happening in our category, and how can we make the most of it?
Amazing. And I know that I referenced it in your introduction that you are data people with the people skills to get things done. Do you think people skills are lacking in econometrics?
I do. Yeah, I really do. And I don't just think that as a sort of pundit going, yeah, I reckon it's this. I think it because I've got information and research on it, which is that remember that time when it was the first lockdown and it was really hot. Do you remember that?
Yes, yeah.
There was that moment where it was just really hot, and at the time, I commissioned some research, and it was when people were just getting on top of having Zoom calls. So there was these Zoom calls of people slightly kind of sitting at home and being a bit kind of frazzled about COVID, but talking about their experience of econometrics. And we got a good bunch of sort of seasoned CMOs and marketing directors, and asked them, like, what's your experience of it? What goes well? What doesn't go well? And what is it that providers of analytics can do to really make sure that marketing actually does become an engine for growth? I can't tell you, just I listened back to the tapes and we transcribed them and we analysed it and everything. But even within the first half hour of the first discussion, but then all the way through all of them, there was just this theme, which is it's all about making sure people are willing to accept the findings and willing to implement them. And if you don't do that and you don't have that, then this piece of analytics is just going to sit on the shelf.
Yeah, completely. I find just any topic, I'm probably going to struggle actually on this interview, if I'm being totally candid, or to stay focused, because there's so many points in and around data in the context of marketing that I want to kind of get your take on or try and understand your thoughts on. But from my side of things, and I remember it was a colleague or a friend of us both, Andrew Wilshire, who I spoke to about a year ago on the pod, and he said something along the lines of statistics is the art of losing information, essentially just saying when you have like any aggregate data, it often conceals more than it necessarily reveals. And in the time I've been working in marketing, the sheer volume of data that is available to people is just overwhelming. So how do you set about removing the smoke and mirrors, to use your line, that just seems so apparent in the industry?
There's a sort of couple of things there, and one of them is that I think if you do analytics work really, really well, and you really, really understand the thing you're analysing, not just by looking at data, but by talking to the people involved, then actually you can come up with some findings that are really very simple and really very clear and really very easy for a non-technical but smart person to get their head around and know how to use. And that's I think what you need to sort of strive for in analytics, to know it so well that it just becomes clear that you can see the wood for the trees. And so I think that's something that again is a bit lacking in our space, because I think some people who are doing analytics can try and justify their existence by going, I've done this really clever, really exciting, really technical thing, and they'll tell clients all about the technicalities of it and how smart they are, and it's all this sort of subtext is just, look at me, I'm so clever, but actually that just makes clients feel stupid. And then they close down and don't listen to it, and it makes people, particularly creative or strategists like yourself or our mutual friend Tom, just switch off. So it's kind of, I think that there's just a really important job to be done to kind of make it so that it is easy to chew on.
Yeah. Oh no, totally, completely. And we'll share. There's a brilliant article you wrote for Marketing Week recently. When it comes to marketing payback, words matter just as much as numbers. And that headline stood out for me. And you and I had a brief conversation on LinkedIn about your want for a measure to be re-articulated as follow a click versus caused by a click, which I just think is absolutely outstanding. I couldn't agree more. But it's why I asked you numbers or words on the intro, because I suppose, is that where the people skills come into it, where the words you use to actually describe and explain the data and its significance to a business is just so important?
Yeah, absolutely. I think absolutely. And you asked me to choose between the two, and I find that really hard, because I do write and I do think words are important, and I do work really hard at the words that I use when I'm talking to clients. I actually try to go for explaining it to a mate in the pub.
Yeah. Yeah.
when I'm trying to explain this stuff. And actually, if you do that thought experiment, how would I explain it to my mate in the pub? Then you come out with something that actually people can get their heads around.
Yeah, definitely. But then you say that as if it's easy, and I think actually that's the bit that people do find hard.
I never said it was easy.
This is true. This is true. You didn't say it was easy. Because to do that, though, but to do that and to actually break something down into language that's so simple that someone who is, let's face it, or at least use my friends as an example, completely indifferent to the world of marketing, to actually break it down into language that they not only understand but care to listen to is really hard.
I mean, yeah, it is. I guess. I mean, I'm I hear this about kind of from various different people, like, oh, I'm not that enthusiastic about data, or it's a bit of a turn off, or it's a bit boring, but I don't see it that way, and we don't. None of my colleagues at Magic Numbers see it that way. We're all like really excited. We think like analytics findings are like Lego. They're something you could build with, and they're colourful, and they're
Yeah.
kind of a way to make a world that's better for yourself in the future. It's exciting, and that's how kind of we think about it. But I'm always a bit sad when people go, oh, boring old data and boring old econometrics. I think, oh, I just don't want it to be like that.
Yeah, no, no, it's nice. I'm glad you used the word color as well, actually, because you're absolutely right. It's more about the story that it does tell. And do you find that approach works when you're talking to, say, CFOs, or is there a need to make things sound perhaps even more complicated than that, or is it your chat with a mate at the pub, sentiment and tone that you use?
I really like talking to CFOs. It's probably more about with CFOs and finance people, and same with clients, data scientists. Actually, we work with a lot of e-commerce businesses, and they've got statisticians and data scientists. For them, it's more like, oh, look at this cool analysis we did. Let me show you the nuts and bolts of it, because they quite like to see the nuts and bolts of it. So it's a sort of enjoyable geek out with their geeks. So we like a meeting with clients geeks.
Yeah, meeting with client geeks.
Yeah.
Love it. Is there anything? There's a few things that I, as I said earlier, I want to dig into. But is there anything that you particularly want to dig into from your own recent findings? Because there's loads that we could talk about, and you have a knack for posting really interesting and easy to understand graphs and results on social media.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, we like a good graph. I think graphs are brilliant, aren't they? I'm a visual learner, but yeah, no. You tell me which one you'd like to talk about, and I'll go for it. Ask me
But I
anything.
want to talk about your recent findings on advertisers committing significant budgets. There were some findings that you found about return on investment being generally higher when advertisers commit, when they use lots of media channels, and yet it also shows that advertising is risky. Is there anything from those findings that you can share and how we can understand mitigating that risk that I think is obviously one of the big stumbling blocks for
Well, look,
marketing?
I think I'm glad you asked about that one, because I think it's quite timely, because like here we are at the beginning of September, and a lot of people are thinking about their budgets for next year, aren't they? And like, how much should we spend and how will we spend it in 2023? So it's a good topical piece, and um, that that piece of that finding came from our ARC database, which stands for the ARC, stands for Advertising Research Community, and it's a gang of econometrics providers. There's 6 of us that all put our results together and then work out what it shows. We're just in the process of updating it at the moment, and there'll be a new presentation at F Week, which will be all about what happened in COVID to effectiveness. But yeah, the finding is that actually we did a really sort of simple plot of sort of 300-400 evaluations, and we said annual budget on the x-axis, and on the y-axis return on investment, and you find that there's a hump shape. So as you start off, the more you spend, the more return on investment you get, and partly that's because you're starting to layer in more and more different media channels, and that means that you can reach more and more different people. And as you go further up the hump, you get to the point where actually you've now reached most of the people that are open to hearing this message. and open to buying this thing. And then after that, the more you spend, the return on investment starts to decline, because now you're spending to reach people that are too hard to convert, or too hard to get them to change their minds. And what was really interesting actually is the position, like where is the top of that hump. So there is a maximum in return on investment, and the top of the hump was actually at quite a high media spend, probably more than most advertisers spend per year. And so that was the conclusion, which was that actually, you do get more bang for your buck if you really commit to it. Really commit to it. And I think it's really interesting point that you raise as well, which for me was one of the most interesting findings. It didn't always get talked about as much as, spend a lot is the answer. But there's a really interesting kind of almost problem in that data set, which is that, yes, if you commit a lot behind a good campaign, you'll get a strong return on investment. But at the same time, if we looked at how many or what proportion or how risky it is, there were a lot of cases in our database where actually the return on investment was less than 1, and there are a lot of cases where the return on investment is about 1. So that means that a lot of campaigns, just about wash their face in terms of revenue, and a kind of not don't pay back in terms of profit. And actually, if you put 30 million quid behind one of those campaigns, you're throwing away a huge amount of money. And so there's this and it's something I'm thinking about a lot, because I hear it from CMOs all the time and CFOs, which is, we know this thing is really good when it works, and we know you've got to commit to it to make it work, but oh my God, there's a really high chance it won't work.
So it's like being at a roulette table and knowing you've got to place a big bet rather than a small one.
Yeah, absolutely. And brand building campaigns are like that, and efforts to go in for brand building are like that, and they're sort of the equivalent of building a new factory or entering a new a new country. Let's try and crack America. It's that level of like, take a risk, spend some money, try and do it for some companies.
Time, weather, and
We interrupt this podcast to announce that we will never interrupt this podcast with ads. Ads that awkwardly nudge you to contact the pod's host, Giles Edwards, on 01189 952 007. Only recently, some pod listening companies did just that, calling for guidance on direct mail and customer research. But we're not asking you to do that. Nope. Anyway, back to the show.
some people are on the fence. They think it's all over.
Yeah, it is now. Hang on, hold on.
So I suppose in the context of where we are now
There we go.
and the kind of financial crisis that we are likely facing, I suppose that maybe that doesn't help anxiety levels. I'm not sure.
No, well, I think we've been thinking about this actually this week, because we're looking at the new data that's come into that ARC database I was telling you about.
Yeah.
And we're thinking about this question, which is, what does the experience of what's happened over the last few years throughout COVID tell us about the best things to do for effectiveness in the next couple of years, where there's this cost of living crisis, inflation running rampant, and people not being able to afford their energy bills and so on. And it's really interesting, and we're trying to pull out some interesting stuff. And one of the things that is true is that in every recession or every episode where the economy goes through a situation where consumers are impacted, what happens is that some sectors have a different experience than others, and some sectors really get hit hard, and some sectors come out of this episode or a recessionary episode stronger. That's because it's almost why recessions exist. Actually, it's kind of there because these are episodes when the economy changes and the structure of it changes, and different sectors or different types of activity does better than others. And we saw that massively in COVID. So some sectors did really well, some sectors didn't. And what we're going to be looking at is, what's the right strategy for effectiveness in marketing if you're sailing into a storm versus the wind is still behind you. Because there are still, even with the cost of living crisis, there are some sectors that are still doing just fine. Travel is one, for example.
Yeah, I suppose it's the old adage that it depends is always the right answer, depending on the context. I was having a conversation on Twitter a couple of days ago about this crisis, for want of a better word, and it's important, and it's really made me very happy to see that the IPA were defending a lot of the rhetoric around cutting ad budgets. But of course, if you're in survival mode and your business needs to survive, then actually, sadly, for those of us in the industry, cutting your ad budget might be the right thing to do. But for customers and brands that can afford to continue to promote, you will get, relatively speaking, more bang for your buck because I suppose fewer can.
Yeah, that is definitely the line that people repeat. For me, it's more complicated than that.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah,
of course.
which is that the argument about saying in a recession, if other people stop spending, you'll be able to get a better deal on your spend, and therefore you'll get excess share of voice for cheap. The next step in that argument is that if you get high excess share of voice for cheap in the middle of the recession, when we're growing out of the recession, you'll be growing faster because you've had that store of excess share of voice that you've built up in the dark times. And so, but what really matters is if you're in one of those categories in a recessionary environment isn't going to grow out of the other side of this recession. For example, in COVID, all of the high street clothes shops that closed, they didn't survive that recession, and there are others that survived but weren't doing well, and it's not because of the marketing, it's because of structural things in the outside world about the way that recession or that COVID period changed people's habits and shopping patterns, and made people buy clothes online instead. In that example, so the excess share of voice in the dark times is no use to you if your category is not going to grow out of this recession the other side.
Yeah.
And that for me is what it depends on.
Or I suppose if it doesn't, return to, quote unquote normal, I suppose, which of course, as you've just said, it might not do. Yeah, no, that makes complete sense.
So it really does depend.
No, it does. Yeah, it does. It's one of those things. It never makes for a good podcast. It depends as an answer, but I always find myself saying it as an answer because, of course, it's the right one.
I think it's okay if you say what it depends on. If you just go, it depends, and then that's the end, you're like, well, that's no good. If you see what it depends on, then it's helping, I think.
That's where I get unstuck, though, Grace. I'm slightly mindful of time because I want to make sure we get everything in. So I'm going to move to listener questions now.
Okay.
So asking the general public for their opinion, be it on Brexit or boat names, is notoriously fraught with danger, but that's not stopped us asking. So we've had a few in, and we've selected two. I'm going to start with Tia because it might allow us to elaborate even further on the topic we're on at the moment. So Tia asks, in times of high inflation and economic crisis, brands are often quick to slash their marketing budgets. What is your advice in times like these? And do you have any evidence to suggest brands don't do this? So I appreciate we've just spoken on that, but is there anything else on that you might be able to add for Tia?
I think it's really interesting actually because this current episode is about inflation, and I think what we were talking about then was sort of general kind of recessions and general and what happened in COVID in particular. And I think in inflationary times, I mean, there are some sectors that do well in inflationary times. So, for example, some FMCG brands will be doing just fine right now because they're able to pass on the additional costs in their supply chain to the final customer. You have to buy food, and you can swap from one brand. You can swap from brands to own brand to own label, but you still have to buy some food. So prices going up in sectors where people have to buy that product can actually benefit some sectors. And those are the sectors where actually there's no reason why they shouldn't continue to advertise and take advantage of it, of cheaper share of voice if it's there. And I guess that's another thing that I would highlight about the current period as well, is that as well as consumer inflation, in terms of prices of things that you and I go and buy in the shops being higher, we're also in a kind of period of really very high media inflation at the moment, which is that the cost of buying TV's gone right up. Google and Facebook have put the prices up as well, so cost per clicks are up. That is making a big difference as well. So this kind of idea that there will always be cheaper share of voice isn't actually true right now, because media is very expensive, so share of voice is more expensive than usual right now. So where that will go, I don't know. So I think that kind of line that quite often gets trotted out in recessions is plain wrong based on the data at the moment.
Yeah, as you say, there's so many variables, aren't there, to keep an eye on. Question 2. So this is from a friend of the show and Call to Action alumni Dave Wakeman, who asks, is there any validity to a lot of the trends people were talking about that were certain to be with us due to the pandemic, like the economy being advanced 10 years in online shopping, for example?
Yeah, so I think I think things have changed because of the pandemic. We see it in our own lives that we've all gone to hybrid working, and can you hear the sirens in the background? I live in South London.
They'll always be there.
Yeah, we actually camped out during the pandemic, and we realised that throughout the whole night where we live, there's just nothing but sirens.
We've got them over here in Reading today as well, so we'll have it in stereo soon.
Yeah. Sorry, what was I saying? I was just saying about things have actually changed, and I think in our own lives, even things like being able to do Zooms and not travel, those things have definitely changed. And another thing that has also happened is that the pandemic period was an example of something that even though there nobody would ever wish to repeat it, it's an example of what we would need to do to stick within bear with me on this, to stick within our climate change, where we need to be on climate change. So I saw some research about it the other day, which is that during the pandemic, global emissions of carbon dioxide went down by 7%, and it just so happens that 7% is the amount it needs to go down every year to stick within the 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees more warm from here that the scientists say is really needed to avert catastrophe. So actually we needed to cut the amount of emissions that we did during the pandemic, and then do that again every year, cut it even further every year to get to where we need to. So I think there are, to get back to your listener's question, is that there are a whole range of things that have gone back to normal, and that's absolutely right, and I'm really glad of it. We should bring things back to normal, and the percentage of sales that are being in the UK, at least the percentage of shopping that's being done online has not gone back to where it was pre-pandemic, but it has gone back to where we think the trend line pre-pandemic might have been now if it had carried on how we might have expected. So a lot of things have gone back to normal, and that is really, really good. But things have changed, and I think it's always really just worth having that climate thought in mind as well, just like an example of what needs to happen.
Yeah, I did see some stunning photography and some video during the pandemic of where, nature and wildlife had returned to certain areas. I mean, there was a complete takeover in some kind of rural towns in Spain, I believe, and wild boar moving in. But it was, it was really fascinating and something quite magical about it. Wonderful. Right, the final part of the interview then, Grace, is our 4 pertinent posers that we put to everyone. Starting with, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I thought about this when you sent the email over, and I thought about my younger self at that first job in Mindshare, and you honestly, you couldn't tell her anything. She totally knew it all.
Right.
I'm not actually a big advice giver.
Okay.
If people ask me, I will give advice, but I wouldn't have liked to tell her. She knew exactly what she was doing.
I love that. It's funny, isn't it? I don't know. Is it an age thing or I don't know what it is. You certainly go through that phase where, I mean, you can't know what you don't know, but there tends to be a peak, doesn't there? I don't know if it's a confidence thing or I don't know, an early maturity thing. Wonderful. So nothing. So there's nothing you would tell her because she wouldn't listen.
She wouldn't listen.
She wouldn't
But,
listen. Wonderful. Amazing. Number 2, if you could banish one thing from the industry, what would it be and why?
So, I mean, I'm on record on this I did the Marketing Week 101 and Room 101, and the thing I would put in Room 101 is absolutely being able to bid on competitors' trademarks in search. I'm really furious that it exists. I think it should be illegal.
Yeah, no, I agree. I totally agree. Do you care to expand on that at all?
Yeah, I can do, and the reason is that first of all, I don't think it really does much. Like it does, we're evaluating it a lot of the time, and it's mostly being used in a navigational way. So people really click on it instead of clicking on the organic listing. So, I've put in Gas podcast, and the first thing that comes up is a paid link, and then a couple of lines further down the page is the unpaid link. And I honestly, quite frankly, don't care which one I click on. And the fact that there's a paid link there isn't making me any more likely to arrive at your podcast page. And we see it in evaluation time after time that it doesn't do that much. So it's kind of a waste of money for the advertiser. But what annoys me more than that, because I think advertisers got enough data and they ought to be able to, decide for themselves what they want to spend their money on. But what annoys me more than that is the existence of this thing just forces everybody to defend themselves and buy more of it. So, if say Uncensored CMO decides to buy a search term that turns up next to Gasp podcast, that's a cynical attempt to get traffic on the back of your brand name, Giles. I'm sure John Evans.
Well, I don't know. I was about to say I can see John doing just that.
But
The murky morals of John Evans.
But it just and that sets up it's trying to get traffic off the back of your brand name, which feels like an unfair use of something you own. And then on top of that, that means that you then always have to buy a paid ad because otherwise, you're getting further and further down the page with your organic listing, and all of it is just not doing very much, but just a sort of forced spending money and sending it to Google. And I tried to work out how much it might be recently, and it's a lot. It's enough that if you could give it to the government, or you could put it to use on helping people, it would make a huge difference. Like it's like a lot of council houses, for example.
Yes, no, I fully agree. I mean, I think sadly Google's probably just licking their financial lips and just enjoying this kind of market that they've created for their own ends, really. I mean, I suppose are there any instances where you could see it being beneficial for a brand to have an ad on its own brand name, in the spirit of it depends?
I think on your own brand name, there are reasons to do it. For example, the Google crawlers might direct the organic listing to the wrong landing page, or a landing page that doesn't convert that well. So in that case, you might decide that you want the paid ad because you can actually really direct people that way. So for example, say you're on TV and you want people to come to the TV landing page, so you could buy that ad just to make sure that was what really happened and really control the journey. So things like that, there's a reason to do it. But bidding on a competitor's one, it just feels really immoral to me, and then wasteful, because people who are popping a competitor's name in, that's where they want to go.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm kind of now wondering whether someone like Rory Sutherland might say there's a kind of signalling value of sorts, but I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm not sure if there would be. Number 3 is any books that you can recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, so I thought about this one, and I think there are some obvious marketing books, which I'm not going to name because I think that's quite obvious, and everybody that comes on your podcast goes, this good marketing book or that good marketing book. But I'm going to suggest that your listeners might want to read a novel by Neil Stevenson called Snow Crash. And I'm going to suggest that for 2 reasons. First of all, this is the book that invented the term metaverse, and it is an image of the future in which, people spend time more online than they do now, in a much more immersive way. And I think it potentially is the way the world is going. I was one of the people when Facebook rebranded to Meta that actually thought it was a good idea, because I think if they put money into that, then it's bringing to life a future that is probably going to happen. But also because Snow Crash is a really good book. It's a real page turner thriller, and in it, that in this version of the future, the competition on pizza delivery has got so fierce that it's the mafia doing it in the future.
Amazing.
And the penalty for getting your pizza delivered late is death. It's an amusing and funny book, and prescient, I think, in a few ways.
Yeah, amazing. Am I suppose I shouldn't really ask for spoilers. I'm just wondering how it all ends.
You got to read the book.
I think I'm probably, I got to read the book or live Meta's twisted future. Amazing. I love it when books come up that haven't come up on the show before. So that's wonderful. Snow Crash.
There you go.
And then number 4, Grace, is we always dedicate every episode to someone, and we bestow or hospital pass that honour, depending on your view, to our guest, who has to give their reason why. So would you kindly do the honours?
So yeah, I would. I've got a number of amazing women data people who have supported me in my career and helped me get to where I am now. And there's 2 of them in particular that I'm struggling to choose between. Neither of them are famous. None of your listeners will have heard of them. But one of them is so I'm gonna can I go for 2? I was being really decisive at the beginning, wasn't I?
Do. No, that's fine.
But one of them is Louise Cook. And Louise Cook is the lady who worked at DDB in the very early days of econometrics, and actually took Les Binet on as her graduate trainee. And this is in the 1980s. And I always have this picture of them wearing kind of luminous socks and listening to Culture Club, but I'm sure that's not what they were doing. But Louise is the one that trained Les, and then later she trained me. And without her, I would not be as good at what I do as I currently am, and I wouldn't have the confidence to pontificate on things, because I now know that I have a kind of good basis for that. I can walk the walk and not talk the talk, but it was her that trained me. So that's Louise. And then more recently, a lovely lady called Sarah Hunt, who has been a mentor to me, help me with a range of decisions in the way Magic Numbers is run, because she used to run similar businesses herself, and now she's our non-exec director, and she's just a massive support and a massive help. So those two ladies of data.
Yeah, 2 ladies of data. That's brilliant. No, they're great dedication. So this episode is very proudly dedicated to Louise Cook and Sarah Hunt.
Thank you.
Thank you. So as a final call to action, everyone listening can head over to the listing, and there'll be links to everything Dr. Grace Kite related. We'll link to Snow Crash. We're going to link to we'll link to all of your Marketing Week articles, but I would especially suggest people read the one we were referenced earlier. How else can our listeners get more Grace Kite?
So, if your listeners are interested in any marketing evaluation or analysis, you should come to Magic Numbers, because we're really good at it, and we do it with a lovely kind of kind face. So that would be number one. But we also, as you said, publish research. We put out lovely charts every month. So the call to action would be to follow me on LinkedIn, or follow Magic Numbers on LinkedIn, or we're both are on Twitter as well. So all of our research comes out on both LinkedIn and Twitter, and we give it away for free. We love it when people comment and chat about it. And also the final one is to look out in future, because we are going to be launching a Magic Numbers Academy, whereby we offer training. So that isn't there yet, but it will be in future.
Oh, wow. And is that training to individuals or businesses, or both?
Both, but individuals mainly.
Perfect. Fantastic. Well, we will include all of your social links
Thank you.
On this episode too. Dr. Grace Kite, thank you so much for joining. I've loved chatting. It's been a real pleasure and a privilege.
Thank you. It's been a joy.
Finally, thank you to everyone listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do share and review the podcast. Keep questions and guest requests coming in. To get in touch, it's easy to find Gasp online. You can check out CTA Pod on Instagram, or email hello@calltoaction.co. I'm off to set up an uncensored CMO Google campaign. Thanks for joining us.
I can't get no call to action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try, and I try. I can't get no call to action. Oh, I can't get no call to action. Yeah, hey, hey.